Hatchworks. And we're super excited. March is all about our ladies. And so we wanted to have a session specifically giving some time to our leading ladies. And I have to say that I am huge fans of our speakers today. They are Tracy Lovejoy and Shannon Lucas. They are authors of one of my favorite books that I've read now twice. So if you haven't gotten it, don't worry. We'll send you a link after the session today. Yep. Yeah, it's called Move. I wanted to say it. I always like saying it. Move fast, break shit, burn out. We're huge fans of Tracy and Shannon at Hatchworks because we've actually had the opportunity to also work with them in leadership consulting, and their style is engaging, thought-provoking, entertaining, and they really help you raise the bar. So we wanted to share that love and all the energy and thoughts that they've given us. We wanted to give our audience an opportunity to have the same. So I would provide an introduction, but I'm afraid I would not do it justice. So with that, ladies, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to turn off my camera. Last thing is this is being recorded, and if you have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll try to answer them either live or we'll answer them at the end of the session. So ladies, with that, it is all yours.
Thank you so much, Trent. It is a joy to be here. The way that Shannon and I are going to do this for everyone today is I'm going to share a bit about my journey. I'm going to share 3 key lessons I think I have in my head rolling around, 3 key lessons for me in my time in tech, and then 4 pieces of advice. And then I'm going to hand it over to Shannon. She's going to do the same, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. So please, as things pique you, as Trent said, would love to hear from you in that way. So my background, it may be surprising. I really never thought I would end up in tech. That was not something that in my early days in my career that I thought I was on a path on. I didn't study computer science. That wasn't part of who I was. What I did know is about 20 years old when I kind of had this sense from the universe that really what I felt like I was here to do was to help people be their best selves, to help people feel happy, feel confident. I didn't understand kind of what this was. I was suspicious of what this meant, but it's an important through line as I move toward what my lessons and my advice are for you. So that's my starting point. I had always been a researcher. I worked as a research associate in university. I'd always been a teacher, even started in high school, and I taught in different capacities all the way through university as well. And so when I moved into my career, that's really where I went. My first job out of college was teaching computer applications. This was in 1995. It would have been my first year doing that. And then I moved into being a variety of research roles within organizations. And then I went back to graduate school, and I thought I would combine my loves and interests of research and teaching, and I wanted to become a professor. In particular, I moved into anthropology, and I thought this would be my lifelong career. As life has a way of doing, a big old wrench got thrown into the plans that I was making, and it turned out I did not enjoy the university setting. I did not really enjoy the academic world. And so it was pretty early that I had my first, I'll call it a midlife crisis, but I was in my 20s, of realizing I don't think that this plan I have for myself is really where I want to go. And I was introduced to a woman who was a corporate anthropologist who was taking the principles of anthropology, which I was already studying, and using them in corporate spaces, which I'd already spent quite a bit of time in as a research associate and as a teacher at that point. And so I thought, well, that's really interesting that I can do more of what I'm loving, but still stay in an environment that felt like it was keeping up with the time, that it moved at a pace and a rhythm that I enjoyed, because academic life felt like it had a lot of infighting. It felt like it moved really slowly. It felt like you had to kind of dedicate yourself to one thing forever, which is really not who I am. And so this opportune meeting with this woman who worked at Microsoft led me to a surprise moment in tech. And so I ended up moving into Microsoft in 2001. And I was working as a corporate anthropologist, as a researcher. I thought maybe I'd be there 6 months, maybe 1 year. I think the longest I had stayed at my corporate jobs at that point was 2 years. And so I thought this will be a wonderful kind of moment that I spend. And then I ended up spending almost 13 years at Microsoft. When I first got there, I was working within Windows. So the operating system I'm on, I'm sure many of you are on a Mac. So there are, Microsoft products that sit there, but I was working in that operating system and I was working in interdisciplinary teams. And so I was a researcher working with developers, with designers, with program managers, with testers, and we were together responsible for building out what would be the new feature sets, the new scenarios, and what would end up being the new versions of Windows. So deeply embedded in the heart of product development and sitting with other folks in this, cross-functional reality of what technology is today. Because obviously, as you all know, technology is not just coding, which is an easy shorthand. From Windows, I went into Windows, what was Windows Mobile, and got to lead first, of course, research there. But then I also had my first opportunity to be managing people. And then I was managing research teams. And so the scope of what I got to do in relationship to product development and the kind of influence that I got to have and what we were doing was growing across that time. So I started managing research from beginning to end, from thinking about customer segmentation, understanding what really was going on in the world from an ethnographic and behavioral perspective, boiling this down into personas and understanding who our key customers were for any particular release or even a particular feature area, moving that into the design process and helping bring all of the functions along with us, all the way through into the optimization and evaluation of a product as we launched into the market. So this is a key moment that thing I started with, what my through line is, what I felt like I was meant to do is really important. Because in my early years at Microsoft and tech, I would kind of check in with myself and say, I have the sense that I'm supposed to be, kind of helping people. How am I doing that? And in the early days, my internal wisdom would say, well, it's about the people that you're working with, your peers. It's about the people you're meeting around the globe as you get to do research. And I really did feel like an unofficial brand ambassador for Microsoft. Microsoft went some really tough brand problems at the turn of the century with Bill Gates at the time. But once I moved into people management, all of a sudden this sense of really getting to see the people in front of me and help them grow was beginning to load for me in a new way. After my time in mobile, I moved into Microsoft Office. So you think, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, but I was running the research team in the innovation lab. And so I really got to be thinking about what's happening on the future horizon. What is it about thinking about the trends and how we're helping people identify things that they aren't saying, those very unarticulated white space elements. And this was really a deep love for me. My time there was really probably my favorite across all of my time at Microsoft. It was around that time that I had this chance moment is I ended up jumping into a leadership class that I thought was going to support me in my growth as a leader, where I started learning coaching, executive coaching skills. And so this was designed to be able to help me be a better listener, to support the people that I got to manage, as well as stakeholders that I got to work with. But again, life had some other plans and there was a wrench that got thrown in. And so what happened for me is this sense of deep calling. And this was the absolute connection to that through line I was talking about, where finally all the experiences that I had felt led to jump into began to make sense of how I could really be supporting people to find their happiness, to be their best selves, to really find their confidence. It was really disruptive, though, because I was not at the time at all planning to make a change. I was a researcher. That was my primary identity. But after 3 years where I stayed at Microsoft, I took the training initially in 2010. In 2013, I ended up leaving Microsoft, founding a business, beginning consulting. While I was consulting, I was still a researcher, and I wanted to get really clear on who I wanted to serve. And this is a place where the time sitting in the tech world was so important to me. I personally had just loved the anxious hum of big tech. It just fit the vibration of who I was. And when I really thought about the people I had most enjoyed working with there and my coaching clients, because I had begun coaching in-house at Microsoft, The folks that came to mind were those people that really were taking those big leaps, the folks that got so excited about big, bold opportunities at work and in their personal lives, and they were willing to roll that rock uphill. And that completely set the trajectory of where I am today and where Shannon and I come together. And so it led me to naming a category that today Shannon and I talk about as catalysts. These folks who take in information at rapid speed, they see the opportunities of how to make the world around them better because of what they're taking in. And then they move into action before they even know they're doing it. And at Microsoft and Tech, it was such a beautiful place for me. At the time, I didn't even realize I was studying it because we had visionaries, but they didn't move into action. We had folks that really said, okay, no, I love the concreteness and I want to implement and I kind of want to bring things into being, but I don't need to set the vision itself. But then I had those folks that I think back that were always like magnets to me, that were setting the vision and then creating the course forward. And that is today who Shannon and I really, really support. And it's not surprising that a lot of the work we do does end up supporting in the tech sector. So I'll pause on my story there and turn toward my lessons learned and to advice I have. And then Shannon will pick up in her story and then also tell quite a bit about the company that we have today. Okay.
Thanks, Tracy. It's always fun to hear like the retelling of your story and the different little insights.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to jump into your story or do you want me to do lessons learned?
Oh, however you want. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's start your lessons learned. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have 3 lessons when I really think about speaking to a group of powerful women in tech like yourselves. Number 1 for me, sexism was really not that overt. We had all kinds of trainings back at that time, but nobody called me honey. Nobody asked me to get them coffee. There was nothing explicit that I could point to that said, this is because I was a woman that something's happening. However, it doesn't mean that there weren't experiences I was having that we wouldn't necessarily put in the sexism category. And what's so interesting is that when I finally could kind of name and sense make, what I realized is that often these things would be happening with men who really were allies, who truly were advocates. So even when I can point to sexism happening, it wasn't because anyone was intentionally trying to keep me out or keep me out because I was a woman. It seemed to be happening in just very, very subconscious ways. So I'll give you an example. When I moved into Office Labs, where I told you I was managing a research team in the innovation organization there was a gentleman who was the head of design, and he had been managing research, and he wanted to bring in a peer. And he said, you don't have to go through me. We're going to be peers moving forward. You're going to own this. Of course, research and design are going to be lockstep. We're going to be a powerful duo. And in a lot of ways, what we did and what we created in the lab were lockstep, and we were a powerful duo. However, there was a lunch meeting that he had legacy with the head of program management and the head of development. And when I would suggest, hey, it seems like that's kind of an important place for me to be, he'd say, well, no, that's just a lunch meeting. And I still love the opportunity to connect with them, right? We can kind of hear the stories from the 1960s of, the cigar rooms or the clubs women couldn't get into, or into the 80s that, they were on the golf course. And so this was a version of it, but it wasn't intentional, and it didn't have a women just can't come. And so it took a long time of discomfort, honestly, in my body before I could point to what was bothering me. And we sat down and we had a conversation, and I said, this is what's hard for me, is you tell me that we should be lockstep. However, you don't want to represent research, but there are spaces that you do say you want to be in that you don't want to bring me into. And so if you're not representing research for me, and if I can't be in the room, it means the entire discipline that I represent gets left out. And I remember kind of this ashen look, all the blood drained from his face as he had this realization of a subconscious action that he was taking. And it really took me being in my body and being able to kind of tap into, he wasn't formally gaslighting me, but he was gaslighting me, right? But it was so subtle. All right, number 2, big lesson for me. Having managers that believed in me really helped me believe in myself. So most humans experience this thing called imposter syndrome. Statistically, women even more, and even more women in tech. I couldn't see what my value was always. And so when it was reflected back to me, it was really important. Plus, they would really help me guide my behaviors and my career when I wasn't always certain. What does it mean to show up this way? And this ties to a piece of advice I'll have, so I'll kind of cut that one brief. And then third, many tech cultures are rooted in cultures of male behaviors that have a sense of aggression. And this was really interesting for me as a anthropologist. And so not all of them are this way. And in fact, Microsoft through the years really has shifted under the leadership of Satya Nadella. But when I was there, kind of the chair throwing, yelling from Bill Gates and into Steve Ballmer really set the culture. And I remember going to women-specific events where there were breakouts that would almost teach us like how to adopt more male behaviors in this male world, which kind of felt weird to me. Like, do I have to show up like a man to be successful here? And what I'll say is it wasn't so much ever that, but I did have to pay attention to how are decisions made here, who has power, and what makes people successful in this environment, and how do I want to choose to be participating within those realities. So sometimes that meant adopting behaviors, male or not, that weren't necessarily comfortable to me. So for example, one of them I learned, and it's a horrible habit I have to break, but I learned that you have to cut people off about 3 words before they're done with a sentence so that you could hop into the conversations that were happening. Once I saw that this was a way people were successful, then it was something I was willing to try. Was it male? Sure. Did it mean I was having to become a man? No, but I was choosing to adopt a behavior that was true there. So those are my 3 big lessons, and I'll translate this to my advice and then turn everything over to Shannon. Number 1, I'm going to say piece of advice: pay attention to what you love. Pay attention to what you feel really drawn to do. And so this is why I shared that through line for me. That became a guiding force for me, because if you look across my career, it almost looks like I've had really, really multiple different moments in my career. But the truth is the through line was always what I felt called to do. And so knowing that for yourself, or having inklings of that, or just, kind of beginning to pay attention, is going to be critically important. And this really ties to the second one, which is pay attention to your body and how you are feeling, right? Our body is the heart of our intuition, and your body knows. And so with that example of that gentleman I gave you, my body knew something was up. It took me a few months to really put my finger on it, to be honest. But once you sense it, like, I would kind of brush it off of like, no, we've had that conversation. He's saying it's not a big deal. We are really good partners in a lot of ways. I can tell he's an ally, but I was ignoring some of what my body felt until I couldn't. And so I would, really encourage you to be tuning in, because the things that you can experience that may be blocking you, that are outside of our immediate control, may be really subtle, but your body will know. Number 3, get incredibly clear on how you want to be perceived, right? The term brand or personal brand can have kind of a dirty word, but if you want to be seen as confident, able to make change happen, for example, it may mean that there are some behaviors you have to adopt within a certain culture that may not be your norms. And it doesn't mean you're having to become, masculine or a man. If you sit in a tech culture that has those, kind of male behaviors, and that you want to show up in a certain way, then that's the deciding factor. It's not just to be more masculine. So when I really started paying attention to my own behaviors, I noticed I would often volunteer to take notes. I was a researcher, right? And I would kind of click, 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 and lean in. And when someone reflected back to me, one of my mentors, you're going to seem more powerful when you sit back, when you are relaxed, when you seem really present, right? It helped me learn that some of what I was doing because of who I was, not because I was a woman, was coming across in a way that made it easier for me to not be seen as someone that had something to say powerfully in the room. But it took me getting clear on what was important and then observing. So then finally, and I mentioned it, find your mentors, your managers, your peers that are going to really help reflect your value and give you real feedback, right? The feedback of, you're so great, everything you're doing is awesome, not going to be the most helpful. People who are willing to really pull you to the side and be like, hey, yeah, when you did that thing, it wasn't your most powerful moment. Let's talk about it. What was happening for you? Those are the people that you're going to trust, that you want to let into your inner circle, and that you can have those conversations with to really support you on your journey. With that, Shannon, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. I just saw something in chat. Awesome. Yeah, my story is interesting. So I was raised by hippies. I was born when they were living on a commune. So they weren't technologists and they weren't into business. But like Tracy, there's a theme that sort of is the silver thread through my life, and that is sort of exploration and looking for positive impact. That's one of the beautiful things about having hippie parents, is they're like, how do you make the world better in everything that you do? I was always interested in computers. It's a little weird, actually. Like, I begged my way into the computer class in summer camp. And this was when very few people had access to computers. I don't know what I thought I was getting into, but I was 3 years early. We were supposed to be in 6th grade. I was in 3rd grade. And every summer I was there, and I dragged my best friend along with me. And we were always the only 2 girls in the group for years and years. Fast forward, I ended up doing a degree in art history in Paris. If you get the opportunity to live and travel abroad, it's such a great learning that will help your career in so many different ways moving forward. But even then, I was hanging out in the computer lab. It was like, we had the Apple IIe lab, we had some Next, sort of Steve Jobs's pet project, and we had obviously the Windows lab. And I would just hang out with anyone who could teach me anything. I was just like, wow, this thing's on the internet? What's that? And so I found some of my people there, and I was fortunate enough there to have a female computer science professor who saw me and supported me. And, I'm still friends today with her. So Tracy's point about finding people who see you and support you, I just had such imposter syndrome. I was an art history major. And again, I was also one of 2 women probably hanging out in the computer lab that long. What was interesting was when I came back, and with a degree in art history, you're like, what are you qualified to do? I don't know. I didn't have parents who sat me down and talked me through those things. I ended up becoming a gallery director. This was in 1996. People were just starting to think about putting things on the interweb. And so the gallery owners were actually paying someone to put their entire collection online, which was super forward thinking during the day. I also happened to be, not unintentionally, moonlighting at a cafe that was a cyber cafe that was running Linux boxes. And so I was still immersing myself with that exploration and curiosity and finding anyone who would teach me anything about computers. The guy who was building out the website for her, the gallery owner, was gouging her. It was a little bit like a snake oil guy, just empty deliverables. And I was like, look, once I do all of my sort of normal work at the gallery, there's a lot of free time. So I went out and I bought an HTML book, and I taught myself HTML, and I built the website. And I made mistakes along the way. It was imperfect. The learning curve was steep. But I would also go back to the cyber cafe and ask people, or get online and ask people. That took me pretty far down the rabbit hole. I was so excited, and going back to the following your passion, right? I was just there was something, this world that was opening was so exciting. But my curiosity was it's cool in the abstract level when I can hang out on bulletin boards with all of the hackers and learn cool things and leet speak. But I was how does this work? And so I didn't know enough. I didn't have mentors. I didn't have a lot of people. So I took the community college course catalog, and I went like this, And I was like, Novell networking, that sounds great. And so I went and I took a networking class, which had a lot of serendipity. Fast forward, I worked a lot, I studied a lot, I broke a lot of computers, I would pull them apart at home, I would ask anyone who would be willing to help me to mess around with it. And I ended up getting a job in the tech world, partly because it was the heydays of the dot-coms, but also because I put in a lot of hard work. I read a book on spanning tree protocol right before my interview with the head of network engineering, and I threw it up all over the whiteboard, but it was just enough for him to know that I had a basic understanding of technology and that I could teach myself anything. I got the opportunity during this, so I worked for a company that was called International Network Services, which was subsequently bought by Lucent. And I was sent to the middle of the US in a very small farming town to work on one of the largest insurance companies' networks in the world. And at that point, it was one of the largest computer networks in the world. And and this is one of my key takeaways, I just worked. It was like, I realized that like this, I had an opportunity to do this full-time job, and I had all of these people who were willing to teach me. And I considered the extra learning and the extra effort, basically like getting a free degree in network engineering, because there were very few places that you could go in a proper school to get those skills and that knowledge. And plus this was all practical and applied. While I was doing that, I was also exploring all of the other sort of things around technology. And it was like, I would try coding, but I didn't really love coding. I didn't love the debugging. I loved the systems approach of network engineering. And so to Tracy's point, kind of like paying attention to what lit me up and where my thrill was and where my passions and my skills aligned was super valuable. I ended up getting transferred to Microsoft to actually be a consultant, helping them roll out their stuff afterwards. And those were really interesting days. Being Blue Badge was definitely a badge of honor at Microsoft. And I was really liking being a consultant, getting to work on lots of different projects. I also, though, if I'm honest, when some of the roles opened up for full-time positions, what they call Blue Badge positions at Microsoft, I didn't feel qualified. At this point, I've been doing it for like a little bit less than 3 years. I had a degree in art history, and the truth was I had the skills. But what the job descriptions showed were you needed to have 6 years of senior network engineering. You needed to have a master's degree in computer science. Like they were just these almost unobtainable certifications and qualifications that they were looking for. And so finally, one of the guys that I worked with, and I love him to pieces, and Kurt, thank you so much for being a sponsor and an ally. He approached me one day, he's like, why aren't you applying for that job? I'd really love to consider you for my team. And I was like, Kurt, I don't have those. He's like, nobody has those. And it was just like one of those moments where it's like, you don't know someone else, and we know sort of like men will apply if they have 60% of the skills, women apply if they only have 100 or something close to it. So just like that level of awareness is like, find someone, talk to them, throw your hat in the ring. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, right? And so I've taken that with me, but also as I bring people along, as I've been hiring, I look for non-traditional candidates. So I think there's a really important point there. I went really far down the rabbit hole of technology. I ended up building out the Microsoft's internet peering thing. So, I'll talk about the ability to make mistakes, but you also have to know when the context is. Like if I had done sort of what they called the black hole in Microsoft's network, it would have been on the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, right? So it's knowing when you can make the mistakes and when you need to have the depth of expertise. When I went Blue Badge, I specifically went to work for this one manager, and he had 2 senior network engineer women who were some of the most badass network engineer people, and happened to be women in the world. That's a cautionary tale about who you're going to work with, because basically the day that I ended up going Blue Badge, becoming a Microsoft employee, I was transferred to another team. I wasn't transferred, the team leader was changed out, and that had its ramifications all the way down. And so this really inclusive, supportive environment with this amazing manager changed pretty quickly to this guy who had this old boys network that were all of his Navy buddies. And he was giving out these huge design opportunities that everybody wanted to people who had way less skills than some of us did. So it was the dot-com days. I didn't stay around. One key takeaway I'll come back to is don't stay in toxic places. There's a lot of places to work. So I went and I got the opportunity to work at a dot-com called Bazillion. This was back in the day where we were building out what we call voice over IP networks. So mobile phones weren't really a thing. They were just starting, and everyone was just starting to get internet to their house. And we were trying to convince people to get rid of their landline and do this bundled service where they'd get data and a phone line. The fun part was I worked with some of the biggest companies in the world perfecting the technology. So that exploration and curiosity was still ticking with me. We built out a global network with Cisco and British Telecom. I got to travel the world. But what really lit me up about that job was two things. I had a boss who saw me and understood me and supported me in all of the ways. And one of the things, and he actually believed more in me than I did at that point, even after having been a Blue Badge network engineer at Microsoft. But the other thing is he supported me as a whole person, and he was deeply aligned with my values. I started volunteering when I was at Microsoft with a nonprofit called Ignite, which was focused on getting more girls at that point, high school and younger, into technology classes and programs. Cisco had a program that it was rolling out for free in high schools, and you would get a Cisco certificate if you completed the course, which made you almost immediately employable for like $60,000. As I was volunteering in that, from one year to the next, we got the enrollment from 10% girls in high school to over 50% just in 1 year. And to support that, I went to my boss and I said, these girls need to be able to apply this stuff. I want to create an internship program, but I'm going to be competing with their families who are going to be like, you have to have an after-school job to help support the family. And so this boss believed in me and the vision so much that he created a paid internship at $20 an hour in the early 2000s, which was a ton of money to bring girls in to help me and to learn the skills. I see there's questions. So should I stop and see if there's a question now? Keep going. Okay. So I'm going to contradict myself a little bit. When you find the best manager who really sees you and supports you that way, you also might want to follow them. So it was the dot-com days. The company fell apart. He and I and a group of friends started 2 more startups. And then I ended up going and following him into the corporate world. So just continuing with the thread, I'd started my own company, a technology company, after I had my son, which I'll come back to, which allowed me to work super part-time consulting. And the focus for me, again, exploration and purpose, was we were supporting nonprofits and small businesses that wouldn't otherwise have access to technology support. It was really important to me to have that purpose part. I followed that boss from the dot-com back into the tech world. I went to what technologists will call the dark side of sales. So most engineers don't want to be on the sales side, like talking with customers is icky. I loved it because it continued that thread of, how can I help their companies, be better with all of this new emerging technology? The year that I started working at T-Mobile, which is a sort of global mobile telephone company, the first converged BlackBerry came out, which meant it was the first wireless device that had both data and voice capabilities. And so obviously you guys know where that has gone since then. I stayed at T-Mobile for longer than I would have in other circumstances, but I was a single mom. And I'll come back to this too, but it's like we can think about our careers in different little buckets and time frames about what we're getting out of it. So intentionality about the choices that you're making doesn't have to be all the things right now. And so I was able to move out to California, the Bay Area, where all the innovation was happening. And frankly, I could get my job done in a lot less time than a full-time job. So I could spend time with my son that my single mom who worked in the state government couldn't do back in the day. I still continue to work with customers and help the technologists inside transform. Fast forward, I went to another mobile telephony company, Vodafone. The long story short there is I got to build out the innovation program, because this intersection of understanding how we can help our customers transform themselves and positively impact the world, our customers didn't know. And the hypothesis, which, and this is so when I, like Tracy, started moving into the people element of the technology, it was like, who are the people who can help our customers see that vision and then move into action to make it a reality? So we started by identifying the 8 positive troublemakers around the world. Vodafone's very global. We wanted to connect them and create a shared language and a safe space where they could try things and fail and accelerate the impact that they were having. After 4 years and, success by every metric from an innovation perspective, in-year revenue, pipeline, products to market, customer impact, we had over 100 certified innovation champions, which was amazing. And I was burning out. And the reason that I was burning out was because not all of the innovation champions were showing up the same way. Now, you've heard me, I am curiosity, hard work, and get shit done. And that was a subset of the people who were signing up to be innovation champions, but it was a small subset. Because I was so successful, or the program was so successful, I really had every bell and whistle CEO support that I could have ever wanted. So it wasn't an issue of not having resources. I was like, there's something missing that I can't unlock here. And this is where Tracy's and my story comes together. My college roommate suggested that I hire an executive coach, and she was part of a group that Tracy was connected with, and that's the stars aligned literally, and that's how we met. And when she shared with me that initial research about what it means to be a catalyst, it was like being hit by a bolt of lightning. It totally explained what I was seeing both in my personal network, I had created an international community, and in my internal network. And so I was like, right, those are the people that I want to work to support. I did stay in the corporate world for a couple more years. I had a couple more sort of hypotheses I wanted to test. So I went to Cisco, really one of the biggest network engineering product company in the world, because I was curious about how companies could innovate and create startups or spin-outs as a means of getting new ideas out into the marketplace. Again, the catalyst wants this stuff to be realized. And then when I was tapped to be executive vice president at Ericsson of emerging business, I got the opportunity to run what they call the P&L, my own business. I was basically a standalone business unit. We had $150 million of business every year. And the goal here was to identify and move into new markets. And then in 2020, Tracy and I came together to do this full time. That was a great year to write a book. I mean, it was a shitty year in a lot of ways, but it was a great year to write a book. And now we work with organizations full time to help them identify and activate their catalyst to create big, bold, positive impact in the world. So my learnings. The first one is hard work combined with an open mindset can take you really far. And so I just want to double down. There was this like really embarrassing moment when I had gotten to Microsoft and I thought it was hot shit. And like, okay, I came from an art history degree to being a network engineer at Microsoft in super short time. So like a little bit justified, but I was throwing it around and blah, blah. And this really sweet guy who was a mentor to me sat me down in my office one day and he's like, you have to prove yourself. You have a ways to go before you can ask for X or Y or Z. And he didn't mean it. It was delivered in a beautiful, heart-centered way. And he wasn't wrong. I was like, oh, that feels awful. So the hard work with an open mindset, when someone gives you the feedback, even if they don't deliver it with that kind of compassion, like take it on board and decide what you're going to do with it. You can decide to throw it away, but don't throw it away without considering it, right? And the hard work is like also you have an opportunity if you're early in your career to try all the things. I tried system administration, I tried web design, I tried coding, I tried network engineering, and I found the one that really resonated with me. But when you get there, and you heard me when I was in the Midwest working on that account, I worked 60 hours a week. I was really clear. It's like I would be paying a lot of money to get this level of tech exposure and skill development. So just be clear. Connected with these two things is think about getting certificates. So that Ignite program that I had mentioned, the graduates would have a Cisco CCNA, I forget what the other C is, but it's a network associate. Particularly for women, sometimes we have to prove ourselves extra right now. That's still true. So the certificate can help with your own imposter syndrome. I've got the certificate, but it also helps establish credibility. And there's some that can be just honestly quick hits that won't take too much time, that can add money to the, to your income every year. Connected with the hard work and open mindset is also, I don't think women get taught this early enough, is understand the business. You have to understand why the product that you're making or the technology that you're supporting is being used by your customers, what the business model is. It will make you an invaluable employee. And we see all of these layoffs that are happening in the tech space. But if you can combine sort of customer focused business understanding, hard work, and the technical skills, you become an invaluable employee. So this sort of learning two is, I snuck two under one there. The learning two is find the supportive cultures, not just the managers. As you heard, day one, literally day one, I was going to work for this amazing guy, and it was like a bait and switch, and it was directly into a toxic culture. And the imposter syndrome can be loud. And, when I was a single mom, it was really hard. You have some serious trade-offs to make, but don't put up with it for too long, because there are other environments. And as Tracy said, in one toxic environment, I had 27 days worth of migraines in 30 days. Like, your body will tell you. Hopefully you don't let it get that extreme, but your body will tell you. I do want to say though, when you find that one manager, it is totally appropriate to follow them. Like, if they see you and support you, and in reverse, I've brought people with me at multiple places. So like, find your people, and it's okay to follow them. If I had advice today, it's the be fearless part, connected with that following your passion. But while you're following your passion and being fearless, so like maybe, an example for me was I was unafraid to buy computers, try and solder the resistors and capacitors and break shit, right? The first thing I'll say is think about what it is that you're learning. It's interesting in hindsight, I got more and more intentional with that with each job, but you can think about a hypothesis. Am I going to go work for a big company? What am I going to learn there? What do I want to learn when I'm at a big company? Do I want to go to a startup? If I make that decision, what key learnings am I trying to get? It'll help you guide you about like, okay, I've spent 2 years there and I feel like I've got those learnings, so it's time for the next thing. And connected with the be fearless and follow your passion is like, just apply for the job. The worst they can say is no. A secret hint is always network your way into the job too. So like, don't be afraid to ask for people. People do this to me on an almost daily basis now. Hey, I'm applying for this job. You're connected with that person. Do you mind introing me? And it is the way that you will get the job. Don't put up with toxic bosses. I want to double click too. That's just full stop. You guys get that. I didn't understand fast enough and soon enough, and it's still happening to women. My cousin just came back from mat leave, and it's just maternity leave, and it's not been awesome, and like, that's really unfortunate for the day and age that we're in. That transition is so tough. So like, don't put up with it. The big one that I wish someone had told me that I learned on my own was the thinking in timelines. And I figured it out soon enough, but like, I was not super stimulated for, the full 8 years that I was at one company. But I was a single mom with a great tech salary in the Bay Area, and I found other ways to find fullness in my life. And so you can think of 5-year chunks. What are you going to get out of that next 5-year chunk? Bring others along with you. We need, and to Tracy's point, it's not just other women. I focus on bringing other women and did for years. Also bring your allies along, and they'll make mistakes, but like, show up with the grace so that they're in it to the end with us, I would say. And finally, Tracy knows my thing to everyone is self-compassion, self-compassion, self-compassion. Being a woman in tech is still not easy. We can see that with the people that we work with. So putting your own oxygen mask on before your family, before your boss, getting grounded. And if it's too toxic and it's not going to help you sort of live the life that you want to live, take the steps to take care of yourself. You're worth it. The end.
I love it. And just to, so what Shannon and I do in the world today is we build from the work that we've been doing with Catalyst. And so we support organizations in identifying their catalyst through Catalyst programs. And then we also have a mastermind that we run for Catalyst executives, because finding these folks that, are the way that we live and breathe, really came through as such a passion for us both. And it was such a beautiful marriage, in that Shannon's sense of personal purpose is about really building organizations that are ready for this ever-changing, disrupting future. And for me, as you heard, it's really about that, focusing on the individual and helping them. So it's been just a beautiful marriage of what we get to do today. With that, I'd love to open us up to questions and answer. And we have at least 2 questions in chat to get us started. Trent, do you want us to jump in answering questions?
Yeah, go ahead. And then I'll come in after you have tackled the ones that are in the chat.
Sounds great. Rita, I loved your question. And so Shannon, if you didn't get a chance to see it, talking about listening to your body and leaning in to have difficult conversations. What happens if having a direct one-on-one conversation didn't help? So I just want to start by applauding your courage in doing this. I'm a big believer in trying hard to find the courage to go have that direct one-on-one conversation. When, we get to work with organizations a lot, and you'll see a lot of triangulation, kind of going to the boss or going to the friend. And that's where things get out of control. So great work. But sometimes it doesn't work exactly as you're saying. So my advice is to turn to your trusted peers, or if you have a mentor, to talk about, what is it that you were trying to get across, what happened, and what do they suggest within this context and this system might be the best next step. Because every organizational system really has a different way that they work with things. So sometimes the culture might be you talk to the manager, sometimes you try a second time, sometimes you talk to the HR function. Shan, anything you would add there?
I think it's complicated. There's the stories that I couldn't tell, and it depends on what you are talking about. When I was on that account in the Midwest, I was we had 200 consultants there. 5 of us were women. The environment was largely ex-military, and it was pretty toxic, and there was a lot of sexism going on. And I was so naive. I just went to my boss and I was like, I was like, I'm just going to share. This is bad. And the blowback was tough, because then we had to bring in the diversity training, and everybody knew that it was me. And it was interesting. I ended up cutting off all my hair, not even knowing why I was doing it, but just like a mask, degendering myself, because the trauma was so bad. So I think it's it's not just yes, go have the conversation. Yeah. It's what are the potential outcomes, and how big is this? Do I need an external coach to help me navigate that first, or even a therapist? And that's still happening. Like I said, Chelsea, who's is in our network, and she's in our book. She went through pregnancy discrimination at Google, and that wasn't that long ago. And fast forward, she's changed the law in Washington state, but at massive expense to herself. So on the one hand, it's a certain amount of preparation and intentionality about what it is that you want to talk about. The flip side is let's say that it's not as traumatic as that. Maybe your ideas are just not feeling heard or whatever. One of my mottos is to live life without regret. But I have at least one regret. And one regret is when I left one organization, I didn't just go knock on the CEO's door and say, I need 30 minutes of your time. And you can do that in a way where it's I could have had another job lined up. I did do that in the end. I had another job lined up before I left. But I could have had the job lined up and then gone and knocked on the door and said, if you could support me in A, B, and C, I could deliver 10x what it is. Right. And just that, a little bit of the audacity, obviously doing your homework, coming with the numbers, all of this stuff. So there's this really big sliding scale between not being naive and this side of not walking into the blowback, the self-preservation versus the audacity and boldness, and just knowing what your context is and setting yourself up for success.
Mhm. Well said, Shan. Ariella, love your question as well. We both talked about having managers and mentors that helped us and that really gave us real feedback. And so was it easy or hard to find? Something that I didn't know I did for a long time, it took me a while to understand it, is that I didn't always apply to a job. I often was applying to a person I could learn from. And so, well, that may not be the position you're in or what you're able to do. When you think about seeking mentorship, that would be the frame that I would suggest, is get clear first on how do I want to grow? What do I want to learn? And then look around and think about who do I think has some level of mastery in these areas. And so it may mean that you have more than one mentor at a time. So if, just to riff on where we were, if you're wanting to learn to get better at speaking up and maybe, having direct conversations, and you see someone who does that, then you'd say, hey, I would love if we could meet. And whenever you're asking someone to mentor you, you want to be as clear as possible with what you want from them. Because people who say yes want to help you, but they don't know how to help you if you don't tell them. And say, I would really appreciate it if in the meetings we're in together, you would be watching me. And then, afterwards, can we come together and you can give me feedback on how you think I could have fill in the blank with what you want to show up as, been more powerful, been more effective, whatever the case may be. And so you're going to find folks that give you feedback if you really set them up to tell them the type of feedback you want.
I'd love to respond to Alejandra's question because it's such a fun question, right? Let's just start with, if you aren't already playing with AI, you're behind.
And do you want to say the question, Shan?
Oh yeah, the question is, what are the perspectives that you have for women in tech in the future, 5 next years? So get your hands on whatever AI tools you can and just start playing with them. And this is where that fearlessness comes in. You're not going to break it. So just see what you can do and the boundaries that you can push. That's on the tech side. The connection to tech and the skills to tech is what you need to develop, is the constant curiosity and self-motivation and skills to learn. It is the constant learning of, my son is in the tech world, and he was telling his friends, were you should just take a couple of years off. And he's like, I'd be so far behind. You can make that decision, but the speed of change of technology, it's not what you know now, it's your ability to learn and apply that to the business that I talked about earlier. But the bulk of what women in the future need, and the bulk of what everybody in the future needs, I just actually reposted Sam Altman interview on LinkedIn, which you can see. And he's like, the humans care about humans. When AI beat chess, everyone's like, oh, it's the end of chess. We're never going to watch humans play chess again. And nobody sits down to watch 2 AI bots play chess together. Chess is still alive and well because we care about the humans. So the things to bring in technology, in addition to the sort of tech skills and the business skills, are empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence, a relentless focus on the customer experience. Who are your customers? What problems are you solving? Creative problem solving. And then, in our opinion, also the ability to bring people along on the journey with you. So if you see a thing that has to change in the world, whether it's the culture at work or the tool that you're developing for your customers, slowing down and learning the skills to bring people along, because change is the only constant, and it is just constantly accelerating.
I would add the most recent research I've seen is that we're beginning to close the gender gap in a lot of jobs, including in tech. I mean, there's still a gap, but we see forward progress. Where we're seeing interesting declines, and obviously not overwhelming closing the gap, but women in leadership are leaving at higher numbers than they've seen in the past. And a couple of the reasons that the research cited was, one, we want more flexibility, often is cited in how we want to live our life. If, we want to support family, both, parents or children, whatever the case may be. And number 2, microaggressions, which ties to what I was talking about in my experience, that sexism wasn't overt. It's those kind of smaller things that are happening that can wear you down. And so my advice when we think about women in tech in 5 years, is continue to name what you're experiencing and what's important to you, especially if you are a small number, whatever the case may be. Maybe you're young, maybe you're female, right? Maybe you're coming in from a different country than the rest of the folks. your experience is important. And as Shannon said, right, it might not always be knocking on the CEO's door, but being like, knowing my experience is important, and not from a complaining perspective, but feeling like I want to share with them, hey, I am struggling in this role because there's not a lot of flexibility, or because I am finding that when I'm in meetings with men, some of the things that they're saying to me make it really hard for me to stay engaged. Those are important things to share, and they will continue to help us shift what's happening across the industries.
I believe that's what you call a mic drop. I'm not quite sure. I have to go and look at the definition, but I think that is pretty much on target. So you all did this, both of you did this to me whenever I was on your podcast. So I have one lightning round question for you. If you could go back to your younger self, like the one just starting your career, and give some piece of advice, like another little mic drop moment, what would it be?
Mind self-compassion. Just start to cultivate the self-compassion.
It's huge.
Trust my instinct and listen to myself more, because I would let external voices or shoulds guide me for so long before I'd really listen to what my body wisdom was already telling me.
Great advice. So, I was just listening to both of you, and as a girl dad, I'm so thankful that there are powerful women in STEM like the both of you, who are also really passionate and willing to coach and mentor the other females in the space. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your experience with us. And it's also why I'm really passionate about Hatch Futures. We have a commitment to getting and introducing more females across the world, Latin America and the US primarily, but we want to take this global. So that way we've got more female in tech and more female in leadership, because we believe in the leading ladies of the world. So for all of our audience members, be sure to follow Tracy and Shannon on their LinkedIn. And even more, make sure you go and buy the book. It is a fantastic book. So we'll be sending all of those links as a response to this. And Tracy and Shannon, thank you. It was fantastic.
Thank
Sean,
you
thanks for
having us.
making a space for this and the support for this. We need more allies like you, so thank you.
Awesome. All right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.